This is a kit that I've built over several years after spending a ton of money on things that I probably didn't need, but eventually finding out the things that are essential to helping me do more work and better work. So I'm going to talk about what those things are and why I love them so much. And the last item I'll talk about is something new I've invested in that is actually helping me in ways that I never really expected. Even though there are some incredible cinema cameras coming out this year and in the previous year, this camera is still a beast today. And I do not think it's a bad thing for anyone to invest in an FX3 in 2026. And even to me to this day, after filming commercials with it, documentaries with it, there's still so much more that I can get out of the FX3 the more I learn about cinematography, lighting, color grading, editing, and all those aspects of storytelling. Of course, there's been a million things said about the dual ISO, and that's typically what people bring up. But for me, that really is a selling point for the FX3. Having the access to 12,800 ISO is so important, especially on documentary work where I don't always have access to lights, and I have to rely on whatever natural light is there, even if it is nighttime. Not only that, but 12,800 ISO isn't just a tool to save you when everything is dark. Having access to an ISO that high allows you to overexpose a lot of those dark scenes, which helps you actually get very clean images. And another reason I love 12,800 ISO, and this was actually talked about by Oren Soffer, who was the cinematographer on The Creator, who used the FX3, he talks about the fact that at 12,800 ISO, we're able to create these lighting setups and contrast ratios that wouldn't be possible without higher wattage lights. But with a higher ISO, we're able to use lower power lights. So for people like me who don't necessarily have a ton of budget to spend on lighting, especially at the cost of some of these high watt lights, it's nice because I'm still able to practice cinematography and create these setups that would otherwise cost me $10,000. So I'm saving money in lighting where I'm spending it in my camera. When you're a beginner, the most important thing about a lens is the aperture and the focal length. You're thinking about how wide open it can go to give me that shallow depth of field and to allow as much light in as possible. And what is the focal length? Because that is really going to determine how the image looks. Is it very wide? Is it very tight? Is it a zoom lens and giving me the option of maybe multiple focal lengths? But as you start to transition into intermediate and advanced, you start to learn that lenses also give your image character. Whether it's a distortion, whether it's an anamorphic lens flare, or whether it's softness at the edges of the frame. And these characteristics are found in the films that we watch every day, and we may not even notice them, but these subtleties of cinematography, this is what starts to separate intermediate to advanced. So obviously I've been looking at Cine lenses and Cine lens kits and thinking about, well, someday when I do have the money to spend on this, what do I want? And I realized that I really just want to stick with what I have, which is the Sigma 24-70. Projects like It's Just Pain, where I was filming Truett Haynes running an ultra marathon, I was the only camera operator on the documentary, and so I had to get as much coverage as possible. But the problem is, if I had a Cine lens kit that was all prime lenses, I would have to stop recording when I'm switching the lenses, or I would have to devote myself to one focal length for one of those rest stops. And that would make it extremely difficult to get those variety of shots to help me cut once I get to the edit. But another thing in these situations as a solo camera operator is that I'm thinking about the exposure, the composition, I'm thinking about whether the audio levels are appropriate, and these things are changing all the time as things are happening. And for that reason, being able to just not worry about focus on top of all that is just a really nice plus. So having that autofocus feature in the lens that a lot of Cine lenses don't have is really nice. Now they are coming out with Cine lenses that have autofocus, and they are having Cine lenses that are zooms. So I'm sure maybe 5 years down the road, I'm going to be taking this advice and throwing it all out and getting one of those. So as of now, the Sigma 24-70 is the only lens that I have in my filmmaking kit. Now, next up we have the 1/8 Black Pro Mist Filter. So in the absence of a Cine lens, a mist filter is really going to help add character to your image. First of all, Cine lenses are typically much softer than photography lenses, so they're not as sharp. And so a mist filter is actually going to help soften the image a little and get us a little bit closer to what a Cine lens would feel like. A mist filter also helps bloom the highlights. Rather than a very harsh cut between highlight and shadow, the mist filter creates this nice gradual glow and fall off, which is a lot nicer to look at. Now, I'm aware that both of these characteristics are things that we can get in post-production, but the problem is it's very easy to underdo it and very easy to overdo it. If you underdo it, you don't really get the effect you're going for, and if you overdo it, it's honestly probably worse because we start to call attention to it and it doesn't feel authentic, and therefore it feels amateur. So 1/8 is the strength of the filter. A quarter starts to really draw attention to the effect. It starts to feel a little bit more dreamy. And a 1/2 is very noticeable, and you're going for a very stylized look. So for me, I love the 1/8 because it's so subtle that I can leave it on the camera at all times, regardless of the project, but still powerful enough to give me a different looking image than if I hadn't used it at all. And what you'll see in mist filters also is there's mist filters and there's black mist filters. The black mist filters help keep contrast in the shadows, whereas a regular mist filter actually kind of washes out the image a little and takes contrast away because the shadows get lifted up. So whatever brand you get, I do recommend getting a black mist filter. And in my opinion, the 1/8 is the safest bet to go with. Next up is the Sennheiser MKE 400 mic. It's small, it's sturdy, and it has great audio. And on top of all those things, there are a few things I like about it. Number one is the protective casing around the microphone actually acts as a windbreaker. So it's actually pretty good on a windy day to block out the wind without having to put the dead cat on the mic. And that's great for me because honestly, I hate putting dead cats on mics. So I've never actually used a dead cat. I find this mic is great unless I'm in extremely windy situations like by the coastline. And in a situation like that, I'm probably not trying to capture in-camera audio anyways. I'm gonna replace it in post-production with something else. And secondly, the microphone turns on and off with the camera, which is great because in the past with different microphones I've owned, I've turned the camera on, I started rolling and didn't realize that the microphone just wasn't on. And there's also been situations where I left the microphone on when the camera was off, and then I wasn't sure whether or not the microphone had enough battery left to get the shot that I needed to get. So it's a small thing, but it's honestly one of my favorite things about the mic. Next up is the Atomos Ninja monitor. A monitor is so important for video work because it really helps you see what's happening in your image. Sometimes it's really hard to get a sense of what's happening on the LCD screen, whether it's your white balance or your composition or your exposure, but having a larger monitor is really gonna help with all of that. Now, you don't need the biggest, fanciest monitor out there. I would say the most important aspect of the monitor, though, is the brightness, and for it to be at least 1,000 nits in brightness. Because when you're outdoors and you can't really see what's happening on your LCD screen, it's gonna be so important for you to feel confident about what you're doing. It's basically impossible to do video work without ND filters. There are ways around it, but at the end of the day, the ND filter is the tried and true way to change your exposure while maintaining your other settings, whether it's your shutter speed, your aperture you want, or your ISO. I recommend an ND filter that goes from ND4 to ND64. If you go with a range that's less than this, you might not have a strong enough ND filter for going out on sunny days. And if you go with a range that's wider than this, what I find is that the stronger the ND filter goes, the more color cast and vignetting you start to introduce into your image. To the point where now I try not to max out my ND ever, and I'd rather actually stop down my aperture before I start lifting up the ND to reach the max point. I have the K&F Concept Variable ND, the Nano X series, and I have actually an ND and a polarizer combined, and I find it's nice when I'm doing product stuff. However, I recommend for filmmaking purposes that maybe you don't get one with a polarizer included, and if I had my time back, I would actually do the same. Because the thing is polarizers can really create this weird lighting effect where it just doesn't feel natural. And if that happens when you're filming a subject outdoors when they're lit by the sun and you don't notice it on your screen, you may get this weird lighting color issue in post-production where you're not really sure why it feels weird, and what was happening was the polarizer was just taking away the light that was naturally falling on the subject. Another thing that I recommend if you don't get the thing that I have is to get an ND filter with hard stops. So when I go all the way to the lowest point, I can't go any further. And if I go all the way to the strongest point, I can't go any further. But a lot of variable ND filters, you can just spin them all around until you go to the weakest point, which gets you back to the strongest, and you keep going around. But the problem is with a variable ND filter that does that, there is a point where they cross over and they create this very weird vignette that's almost the shape of an X across your entire image. And because it's difficult to see what's happening on a bright sunny day, you might not realize that this is happening until you get back into the color grade and look at your image and you wonder why it looks completely wonky. So get an ND filter with hard stops in it. It'll save you a lot of trouble. Next up is a portable LED light, because there are times where even 12,800 ISO is just not going to save me. Because even if I can expose a very dark image, like let's say we're out and lit by the moon, there's still not much shape to the image, right? Everything is kind of flat. That's typically what happens when we're in a very dark space, because there are no lights to create shape. There's no backlighting, no side lighting, no top lighting, nothing creating this nice cinematic roll off of highlights and shadows throughout the frame. And so having a portable light with you that has a battery power source can save you in a situation. And that's what happened here when I was filming this documentary. We were at the last stop of the entire day before the finish line, a super important moment in the entire film. And there were no lights around us. There was nothing to help create any shape. So I set up this light and I just put it on a box in the background. And it just helped create this nice backlighting and really helped me be able to see the subject. And also then I get exposed at an exposure where there wasn't just an absolute ton of noise throughout the image. I recommend a light around 60 watts because if you go any lower, it's probably not going to be strong enough to do what you need it to do. And if you go any stronger, it's going to be a little bit too sensitive, because most times where you're going to need a light like this is going to be where you don't have natural light to help shape stuff. Because if you do have natural light and you learn to work with it, well, you don't even need any lights, especially for stuff that's just more narrative and documentary-esque. But when you're in these dark scenes where you need to start creating shape, if you have a light that's 200 watts, it's going to start kicking out way too much power at even 1 and 2%, where the contrast ratio is just going to be totally whack. And so I find 60 watts is nice because you can really help dial in a nice exposure without it being too strong, but you can be confident that it has enough power to save you in those dark situations. Next up are the DJI wireless mics. I actually have the first version. I think there's like a second and a third. There's definitely a second. There might even be a third version out, I think, now. I love these things. I think they're super handy out on the go. I do want to get a lot better at filming proper interviews with shotgun mics and booming it over them, because that's the best audio quality you're going to get. But in reality, I've created some incredible work that I'm really proud of with microphones like this, and they've gotten the job done. If you're working by yourself or even with just one more person, it may be very difficult to get the whole proper setup of bringing stands with you. And you're also going to sacrifice the location as well. If you want to get interesting locations that are maybe a little bit into a trail, or they're in this very weird place where you wouldn't be able to bring in stands, this just makes your workflow possible. Next up is a tripod, which is one of those things that I spent way too much money on. And you may think, oh, because you got a very good one. Yes, eventually I did. But what I really spent a lot of money on were absolute trash tripods, time and time again. When I was first going out, even when I had my A7 III, I was buying like $20 tripods at Best Buy, and there was a time where it almost tipped over and wrecked my camera because it just completely fell apart. And that day I realized, okay, I need to get a proper tripod now. And a proper tripod is going to depend on a lot of things for you. For me, where I'm out in nature a lot and I'm hiking these trails, I wanted something that was strong, but also something that was light. So for me, it was the Ulanzi Coman carbon fiber travel tripod. Now, maybe for you, a travel tripod is not the play, right? For me, I'm out in nature a lot, I'm hiking a lot, I'm traveling the world and want to bring my tripod with me because maybe we don't have access to rentals wherever we're going. So I want something that's lightweight, so I can just bring it with me all the time, even if I'm walking and it's strapped to my backpack. But for you, you may want a heavier camera setup, and so you may need a bigger video tripod. And maybe that's your thing, and you're doing all local work, and most of the places you're going, you can drive there, you're bringing your car, all your gear is packed in there, and that's the path you're going down. Or maybe you're someone who wants to be a little bit more of a hybrid shooter, so you're photography and video, and maybe you want a tripod that's not travel tripod, but you want a sturdier photography tripod, and that will do you for photo, video, and content. And lastly, my new little secret sauce that I've added to my kit is a V-mount battery setup. The reason I bought it is because I wanted to balance out my documentary setup. So projects like It's Just Pain, where I'm filming an ultra marathon for literally like 24 hours, I'm holding the camera basically the entire time. So when you don't have a V-mount battery helping to balance that weight backwards, when you have a microphone and a monitor battery and a heavy lens, the entire camera is trying to sag forward the entire day. And that can be hard on the hands, but okay, let's say I train for it. The problem also is that the camera is kind of unstable, so it's hard to get nice, stable handheld footage. But another thing I love about this is it does such a good job at powering things in your kit. Right now, there's an Aperture MC pointed at the ceiling on the shelf behind me, helping to add a little bit of ambient light in the background. It was the last thing that I set up for this talking head. I kind of realized, the background is not kind of bright enough or lifted enough with just the lamp turned on. So I haul out my MC and I realize, oh great, the battery is on like 5%. And then I realized, oh, well, I'll just plug it into the V-mount battery using like a USB-C cable and boom, there we go. Like I said in an earlier tip, there's so many portable lights coming out these days, and a lot of those portable lights have an option to be powered via V-mount battery, whether that's directly on the V-mount battery, or you can actually just attach the V-mount battery to the light and then use an appropriate cable to power it. And another reason I love this is because a lot of these portable lights that are coming out, well, if you have to buy the manufacturer battery for it, it's usually expensive and they're usually not that great. But if you start investing in V-mount batteries, well, if all of a sudden you have 1 or 2 V-mount batteries, or maybe even 3, depending on, what you're building up towards, now you're investing in stuff that works for everything, right? For your cameras, for your lights, for everything. There's a ton of gear out there that's gonna make your videos look better. Like that, tomorrow your videos will look better if you buy a better camera or you buy a better lens. Like, it will make your stuff look better. But the reality is there's also little skills that we can learn to use the gear we currently have that will make our projects look better. So the question is, what gear can you invest in that lets you do the work more often or in situations where you wouldn't have been able to? Because that's what's gonna help you do more work, do more interesting work, because you'll end up in situations where you couldn't have done it without that gear. And inevitably, you're going to get to a place where you're making better work because you're making more work. And that's where you get the practice to learn the skills to use the gear you have. And eventually that gets you to a place where you have the money and the confidence to make these big investments in things like lenses and cameras and God only knows what else. So whatever you do, good luck with it. You can leave any comments, questions, whatever it is, I will answer it and get back to you and let you know what I think. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.